I'm Rickesh Kishnani, the Whisky Chief.
Rickesh Kishnani launched the world's first whiskey investment fund.
Back in 2013, I set out to start the world's first private equity whiskey fund.
To make an 18-year-old whiskey takes 18 years of aging in a cask.
Only a few problems. I'd never been to Scotland. I knew nothing about whiskey. I definitely didn't know anything about private equity. 3 months later, I ended up on Bloomberg launching the fund. Come with me back to 2009. I had just moved from New York to Hong Kong with my, at that time, girlfriend. We had no job, no money, no real plans. I was 30 years old. We actually had to move in back with my parents. A bit embarrassing. We lived with my parents for 2 years. Started to figure out what we were going to do with life. My wife had 12 jobs over 2.5 years trying to figure out what she really wanted. She ended up finding her career in luxury travel retail, and I ended up trying to look for what were the opportunities as an entrepreneur in Asia. At that time, 2009 was right when the import duty came off of wine.
Wine consumption in Hong Kong and on the Chinese mainland is growing fast, and the trend continued after Hong Kong scrapped wine duties last year, sending imports soaring more than 80% year on year.
I was just getting into drinking wine a little bit myself, and I thought that'd be a fun industry to be part of. So applied for a bunch of jobs, didn't really get anything. I remember a summer where I got a job, commission only, if I could sell wine to bars. It was July and August in Hong Kong, 32 degrees Celsius, and I was lugging around this like suitcase full of wine up and down the hills of Hong Kong, trying to go to every bar and meet the person to sell them some wine. That didn't obviously work out, but I did end up getting a junior sales job at a wine distribution company called Platinum Wine. 2013, and things were really not going well. Turned out I was not the only one who saw the opportunity in China with wine. Basically, everyone and their mother set up a wine business to sell cheap shit wine into China. Prices had gone down, our profit margins weren't really there in the business, and I just didn't see long-term opportunity for me in the wine trade in what I was doing at that time. I remember we actually did this huge partnership with Asia Bankers Club in the summer of 2013, where we wanted to get people to go to Bordeaux on these super luxury 5-day trips where you get to visit the chateaus, buy a bunch of wine, and build up a club. We printed these booklets. They were like 20-page, like super nice glossy booklets. We had hundreds of them in the office, and we did a bunch of events, and we had a total of 0 people sign up to go to one of those events. So it was a complete failure. Ironically, years later, when I got into the whiskey fund, we ended up doing trips to Scotland, fully based on the idea of trying to get these people to go to France, which didn't work. Ended up being much more successful years later. November 2013, things were looking bleak on the wine side, and I really needed to figure out something different. At that time, I was looking for that after dinner drink. I tried rum, tried tequila. Definitely not my cup of tea. And then finally, I tried a single malt whiskey, and it just hit the spot, just like it did that. While I was still working at the wine company Monday to Friday, I spent weekend in November of 2013 researching Scotch whiskey. And the original idea was, can we get access to old, rare, cool bottles, bring them from Scotland to Hong Kong, and sell them to private clients? That was my original goal. So I spent the weekend researching how the Scotch industry works, how am I going to get access to old and rare bottles. And that's when I started understanding supply and demand economics of whiskey. I started researching what happens in the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, understanding that Scotch whiskey basically operates on a either oversupply or undersupply market situation. And back in 2013, based on all the data that I read, and this is way before AI, I came to the conclusion that there wasn't enough single malt, old and rare whiskey bottles in the world to meet the demand that was just starting out of China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the rest of Asia. And then I remember having lunch with a very good friend of mine, a mentor to me, Steve Bernstein, who had worked in financial companies and markets for 30 years, and he worked for Michael Bloomberg in New York once upon a time. And so we were having lunch and a bit of a catch up, and I was telling him what I had learned over that weekend about Scotch whiskey and what I thought the opportunity was. And so he said, you should set up a private equity fund. And I said, that's great. What's a private equity fund? I don't have a finance background. I didn't know what private equity was. That next weekend, basically on Investopedia.com, researching private equity, and just taught myself the structures and the terminology, because every industry has its own lingo, its own language, its own acronym. Brushed up on that, learned the best I could, went back to Steve and I said, I think there's a potential here to create something. And Steve supported that. He would help me with the structuring. I would have to obviously raise the money to be able to invest in whiskey. The plan sounded great. Minus one thing, where are we going to buy the whiskey from? Who's going to buy the whiskey? And this was Steve and I sitting in Hong Kong talking about structuring a private equity fund, but we had no access to anyone in Scotland. I had never been to Scotland and really knew nothing about the industry. So I'd spent the first weekend understanding the Scotch industry, the second weekend understanding private equity. Now the third weekend was I had to find somebody in the whiskey industry who was a distillery manager or master distiller, but was no longer in that job, and also somebody that was not dead. So there was not that many people. The list I came up with was 13 people. I contacted by email. I got 3 responses back. One of them was willing to have a call. His name is David Robertson. He was the master distiller at Macallan and the youngest ever distillery manager at Macallan in the 1990s. I don't know why particularly he took my call, but he was willing and he was excited about the project. So now we had the pieces. We had Steve, who's going to help me do the structuring, David, who's going to help buy the whiskey once we launched the fund, and my job was to manage all of that and go get the money. In January, after the Christmas break, where we spent hours and hours with lawyers, fund administrators, team of people that helped us to write the business plan, and I just spent all my time outside of my wine industry job just working on this business plan, the financials, and getting everything ready. That took 3 months of a lot of hard work and learning a lot of things I didn't know, and really huge thanks to Steve for putting me in touch with a PR agency, a law firm, a fund administrator. Fast forward now to middle of March 2014. David Robertson has flown to Hong Kong. We meet for the first time. We shook hands. We're at the Bloomberg studio at Hong Kong. And then 20 minutes later, we went live on Bloomberg TV to launch our fund. So 12 years later, here we are in 2026. Platinum Whiskey Fund 1 was a success. We raised 12 million US and we exited at 26 million. So we delivered a 17% IRR. We then went back to focus on investing in the supply chain across Scotland. We set up a holding company called Rare Whiskey Holdings. A lot of the investors from Fund 1 followed us into Rare Whiskey Holdings. We then used that capital to invest in a company that owns over 1,000 casks of whiskey. We invested in Whiskey Hammer, which is an auction business, Still Spirit, which is an e-commerce business. As part of that deal, together, there was a warehouse that was built in Scotland and an independent bottling brand, Halcyon, that was built. And now we're looking forward to doing Platinum Whiskey Fund 2.
Hong Kong-based whiskey investment firm Rare Whiskey has just launched its second private equity whiskey investment fund.
Because we think the market timing is right and there's a new opportunity and a new wave of growth.